Welcome back to the OIS Podcast. In this episode, Dr. Paul Karpecki leads a fascinating talk with industry leaders about important developments in the management of dry eye disease. Let's listen to their discussion.
I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. We have a real expert group of panelists today. I'm excited about this group. A lot of industry veterans, incredible amount of knowledge, wealth of experience to kind of share their insights regarding the industry perspective of the dry eye showcase. So let's begin. Doug, if you don't mind, Dr. Faunce, to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to participate in the panel today. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to working through it. I'm Doug Faunce. I'm currently Executive Director and Global Lead for Research and Evaluation in Eye Care at AbbVie. I'm an immunologist by training, been working in the eye care field in that capacity across research, clinical development, translational medicine for a number of years. And for the last 8 or so years, I have served in leadership roles for searching for external partnering opportunities. So again, thank you very much.
Mark?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, Mark Hagler. I'm the business unit head for Sun Ophthalmics.
Thank you, Mark. Rob?
Rob Kissling. I head up medical and clinical at Bausch and Lomb. General surgeon by training, been in eye care since 2003.
Sajjad?
Hi, thanks everyone. My name is Sajjad Roshanali. I am the global head of our ocular surface business at Johnson & Johnson Vision. And I've been in the eye care space for a little over 15 years and super excited to be on this panel. Thank you.
Good to have you. And finally, Jehan.
Thanks so much. I'm Jehan Tamboowalla, head of new products for ophthalmology at Novartis. I've been in ophthalmology more years than I can remember, but I'm really happy to be here. This is such a great panel. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you all for accepting. I mean, you guys really are the leaders when it comes to this area that we're focusing on today, which really drives into everything from, I mean, it's quite vast. The dry eye market, what might affect its trajectory, FDA process in terms of looking at advancements in diagnostics, where we are in terms of the cycle of dry eye. We're going to cover a lot today. We're going to try to do it in about 45 minutes. So let me just open this one up. And again, I'll have you answer as we go along. And if I need to call on you individually, I'll do that as we proceed through it. But let's begin with the first question. What are the main driving forces that you see being leaders in this area in your company impacting the dry eye market trajectory? And you may say it hasn't been a trajectory. You may also say, yeah, we've had billion-dollar drugs. But what do you think are driving forces that we're seeing? And really, where do you see it? The trajectory like this or really like that?
So I'll jump in. And I honestly think with regards to what's going on in the world today, even environmentally, in the US, we see it a little bit more acutely with for example, COVID. And what does that actually mean? Not just COVID, as far as it relates to for easy one, right? Like more Zoom calls like we're having today, or more time on the screens, and the incidence of dry eye disease, and in particular, when I think about meibomian gland dysfunction as the identified cause of the majority of dry eye, that's certainly going to be proliferated, in my opinion, through this disease state. Of COVID. And I think that's not going away anytime soon. Mask wear obviously is contributing too. So I think there's been an awesome introduction of great technologies, not just pharmaceutical products, but also I think technologies that actually treat the root cause. And so I think it's continue to grow in a big way.
I would agree, Paul. I think that there are a number of factors that I can add there. That certainly the continued use and the loyalty to the established brands that are out there, they play a role. But then also, we're potentially looking at the emergence of generics, and we'll have to see how that impacts overall. In addition, to loyalty to brands and emergence of generics, I think that one of the things that I'm most excited about in that trajectory really are the emergence of therapeutics for the more segmented parts of the market, the meibomian gland dysfunction, the Sjogren's, the MGD, the blepharitis. Those are areas that, to date have kind of been broadly lumped into all things dry eye and are now receiving much more attention as bona fide segmented areas of need.
I would second that. I think, it's the market trajectory is upwards. I think the overall prevalence of this condition worldwide is really just being recognized. And, there are sort of on the demographic front, people are getting older. And, as you get older, the overall prevalence increases. As you sort of stare at a television or a screen or computer or iPad, we know there's the blink rates go down. So I think there are a lot of things at play that are causing the overall trajectory to rise. Although you have to say though, with the positives, some of the things that are tempering the trajectory really are on the access and pricing side for new assets coming in. You have to sort of balance that equation. And on the whole, the trajectory is positive, but there are some headwinds on the access side.
It's sort of a strange phenomenon in that there's plenty of unmet medical need in dry eye. I think there's plenty of room to innovate, but I would call it a somewhat mature market when you talk about the generics, when you talk about the various numbers of anti-inflammatory agents out there. And I think because of the payer situation, it's really going to be about doing something different or better. So from that standpoint, it's a semi-mature market, I would say.
But I think to Jehan's point where he was saying, it's that older population, I think we're potentially missing and not looking for the younger population, to your point about more screens. And to me, that if we address that component, that pediatric, like I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, right? I cannot get them off the gaming. I cannot get them off their phones. And I don't know that we are really addressing the fact that they are suffering from things that are related to not blinking enough, to Jehan's point. And I think we need to move away from just thinking about a certain population that we typically used to think of. These people are dry eye people.
I agree with everything that everyone said. With regards to things that are lifting the trajectory, there's increased direct to consumer from a number of companies that's occurring. So that's helping. We've already talked about the increase just in incidence as well. So your pool of patients is growing. You temper that with access issues, but there are more options now than there ever been. That's even going to increase the number of options. Different mechanisms of action will be likely to be on the market, in the near term. So there's a lot that increase the size of the overall market, just in terms of different mechanisms, subsegments, and just the overall incidence increasing.
Great answers. Kind of carrying that line a little further, what you just said, Mark, and showing the panelists, and obviously you guys are showing your knowledge very well. So we do have a good number of approved therapeutics, especially on the anti-inflammatory, most recently even one for short-term therapy, well established and working very well, drops. Where's the biggest opportunities? Is it sub-segmented like you described? Is it kind of some of the things Sajjad mentioned in terms of meibomian gland dysfunction and devices? Is it the interdependence amongst these things? Maybe devices with therapeutics, with, and other aspects of that. Where do you guys, as industry leaders, see the big opportunities in the dry eye field?
I see one of the biggest opportunities to improve actually really is on the rapidity and durability. I think that right now, when you look at the therapeutics that are available, it takes some time. But, what we continuously hear, and, and Paul and others, this well, is that patients would really like something that works faster, that's more noticeable earlier and overall works faster. And I think that that's something that can catalyze, the market kind of to the next level.
I think it's all about outcomes. We live in an environment today where the generation, the consumer, the customer, the patient, however we want to categorize it, has an expectation of what doctors and industry are going to provide them. And that's about outcomes. Like, I want to have a better experience. That's why Amazon's great. That's why Apple's great. That's why all these. Are we giving them whatever technology, whatever therapeutic we're using, are we giving them the best in outcomes? So to me, the trajectory acceleration is only going to happen if we take whatever we have, and we all have great products, right? And whatever our outcomes are, and put that out there. Because the reality is, we live in an information age. The first thing I do when I have a question, and I'm sure you all do the same thing, I open up my Google, right, on my phone. Our patients do the same thing. Is the information about our outcomes out there on that platform like it should be, represented well and accurately? Because we also know there's a lot of misinformation out there. So to me, keeping the end consumer in mind is going to help our trajectory, and then giving them the right information, because they're going to come to our doctors and say, I think I have this. What I want to do this. And those are the types of things I think are going to help that.
Well, and I think in the search for better outcomes, it's important to, as Paul was saying, spread out our thinking in terms of, we tend to look at anti-inflammatories and all else when we talk about dry eye investment, and the idea that the current anti-inflammatories, they're good. They leave something to be desired. Some are really good at efficacy, and they carry some safety baggage with them. So there's, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's definitely room to innovate there still. I think approaching some of the other underlying problems, meibomian gland dysfunction is obviously the elephant in the room, as Paul was saying. And because there's such an overlap between dry eye symptoms, dry eye disease, and meibomian gland dysfunction, I think that's certainly an area of importance in the intermediate term here.
I agree. I think that my answer would have been all of the above, Paul, because looking at subsegments within dry eye, it's the underlying causes of dry eye, as everyone knows, is multifactorial, and consequently approaching it that way would seem to make a lot of sense, and a lot of companies are doing that. So that's one way, and we certainly at Sun are looking at those opportunities. Organically, we're more of a drug delivery company, so we're focused on vehicle technology, trying to get the drug where it can be most beneficial, right? So there are a lot of good drugs that are already on the market, but they're not always optimally delivered. So that's using vehicle technology to do that, or to remove excipients that may cause harm to the ocular surface. So internally, that's our focus.
Yeah, and Mark, to build on that, I think an area where the industry as a whole could innovate, and again would help potentially catalyze, links back to both what you said and what Rob said, and that's compliance. And right now, all of the options, therapeutic options that you have, are for the most part in drop form. It would be great to be able to take the drop out of dry eye treatment. And, you all know the landscape well, and there's a relative dearth of sustained release technologies, at least those that are getting farther enough along in development for sustained drug exposure on the ocular surface. I think it's a very interesting area.
Doug, I think that's a great point, Ron, like the drop thing. And I think that's a huge part of what we need to do, because we have to treat the symptoms and try to get the cause of the problem to be addressed. And that's one of the things that I think what Rob was saying about meibomian gland dysfunction being so critical is it's actually now, I think, becoming more and more identified as the cause. And what are we going to do to treat the cause of that? What's actually causing that? And it's the blocking of those glands. And if we can address the root cause, supplement it with these awesome new technologies, the new drops, the new therapeutics that are being developed, I think we have a winner that's going to deliver the type of outcomes that I was mentioning earlier that the patients are looking for.
So I think if you really look at the ocular disease surface, I think you're really looking at it as a multi-factor, almost an omni-channel approach to this. Because on one side, Sajjad, as you mentioned earlier, information is really critical here. And I think an informed patient, an informed physician, informed payer, smooths everything else down the road. But we know that, dry eye is a heterogeneous multifactorial disease, and one size will not fit all. You have MGD, you have evaporative dry. I mean, there's lots of other underlying etiologies at work. I think understanding the science and then targeting points of intervention are really, really critical. And then you layer on the opportunity to getting the drug on the target tissue the right way. I think those are all tremendous opportunities. And I think the one piece in here that we don't often talk about is, is there an opportunity to manage the pain aspect of dry eye? And are we looking at ways to make our patients more comfortable? Because, I mean, if you're a moderate to severe dry eye patient, the feelings in your eye never leave. I mean, they're there. They're there when you're asleep. They're there when you're awake. What are you going to do? And I think at the end of the day, if we put our patient at the center and how they choose, how they treat, who they go see, I think that sort of sets up that constellation of things we have to do to make it a success. It's not just any single thing. It's a collection of things. And, education is such an important part of this. So I was very glad you brought that up earlier. I think that just goes to show, I'm glad many more companies are thinking the same way.
I love this discussion. Yeah, and you're making really valid points. In fact, even your last one, John, is interestingly enough, two patients I saw yesterday had doing so well. Their main comment was, "I'm not aware of my eyes so often anymore." So it's as they're so used to constantly being aware of it. And also, I love some of the maybe we have to broaden things out, as Rob and others said. I think there's so much opportunity. These are great insights. Diagnostics sometimes drive treatments in certain fields of medicine. In dry eye, we probably know there's at least 30 million patients with dry eye. We diagnose about 17. Of course, we only treat therapeutically about 2 million of them, but that's still about half in terms of the diagnostics. At the same time, they continue to advance. The panel, the clinical panel talk a lot about point of care diagnostics, that they've had really good success with, et cetera. So how have these advancements in diagnostics, or are we still needing more there, impacting the development and treatments for dry eye disease? And if so, how? For example, is it we have to get doctors to look at meibomian glands more, look at the lashes, or what are the things that could help impact the drugs we have or are developing? Or are they sufficient to where we need to be right now?
Oh, I look at that, honestly, the diagnostic part of it, a simple point of care diagnostic that is able to discriminate between the different kinds of dry eye. And then you're able to communicate that with the patient and what you have. And then you have, obviously, by extension, a way to intervene for the benefit of the patient. I think all of those are real challenges still. We've been looking at this space for quite a while. I think an effective point of care diagnosis is desperately needed in a way that the patients can understand. It's I hate to say it, but we've come a long way from blotting paper, and I think it's really, really important to make sure that we bring the science for the diagnosis up to where the medicines are going. Otherwise, you will have an asymmetry, which will be to the detriment of patients and physicians. And obviously, from the point that was made earlier on the outcome side, if you have poor diagnosis, you have a poor ability to measure outcomes. And I think that is going to be a real challenge in terms of making sure the right medicines get in the hands of the right patients. If we can't measure success, then why would a payer pay for them?
Well, in residency, they really drill it into your head. Don't ever order a diagnostic test unless it alters your management. And so far, there aren't any one of these diagnostic tests that definitively alter management. And I think based upon what you had said earlier, I think it's going to be tough because this is probably not one disease. It's probably many diseases. Remember, it's a symptom complex, not an honest to God single pathology. So I think it's probably going to be analogous to rheumatology, where there are markers, but none of them definitive for a syndrome. And some of them predict response to therapy, but not cleanly. So I think that's going to be a tough nut to crack.
I think it goes to, yes, that we've made some great advancements in the diagnostics, but to your point, Rob, the disease is multifactorial. So not one diagnosis is going to work for everything. Mm-hmm. But to me, the challenge is really a short-term and a long-term, right? Are we even leveraging the technology we have today to give the patients the information, to Jehan's point, that they're looking for? That value creation that doctors, I think, want is, because we're all trying to, fight for patients. Can we try provide that additional value that makes that patient super satisfied with what I'm doing? And if we don't leverage the diagnostics that already exist today to get there, then I think we're missing the short-term bucket. To me, the gap there is just office process, right? It's not a everyday thing, and that's something that we need to as an industry kind of work and help to provide that solution that will help them get over that hump.
I think it's, patients treat their symptoms. And you know, that in some ways is the clinical diagnosis itself. If they give you that sign, the symptom complex that defines dry eye.
Well, to an extent, except, I mean, I know we're talking about dry eye, but if you think about glaucoma, they don't necessarily have an active symptom. Or you think about blood pressure, they don't actually have an active symptom.
That's true, and that's why compliance.
That's
why compliance is so low.
100% agree. But my point is, we need to frame that discussion in the same vein as those disease states, in my estimation, because people are going to have varying symptoms. Some people, Jehan was saying, have a lot of pain. Some people don't. But everybody deserves treatment. And if we're going to get the trajectory of the market to be where it's at, I think we frame the discussion a little bit differently to talk about this disease as something more than just what those burning, biting symptoms are.
I agree with Rob. I mean, what you said is almost identical to what I would say. That the existing tests are not definitive in a lot of cases. Dry eye disease is the underlying causes of dry eye disease are multifactorial. If we could get diagnostics that would help us get a better understanding of that and use that in the development of new treatments, I think that would be a big step forward.
What about the whole area? It's great comments, by the way, related to awareness amongst ECPs. Are we doing enough there? And then we'll take it even after that to direct to consumer, because I remember, in particular with Allergan and AbbVie, when you guys did some direct consumer, you kind of led that. We all felt the results, and doctors who hadn't really been in dry eye realized we better start learning about this a little bit more. Are those efforts still necessary now? What would you say are the best ways to tackle that in light of social media? But let's start with educating the eye care practitioner first.
Yeah, so Paul, I can say stay tuned. We have a new upcoming DTC commercial that will begin within the next several weeks, and it's really focused on that. I mean, it's focused on connecting the patients to their condition and how to go about understanding what it is and what their options are.
Great, look forward to seeing that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, at the end of the day, what you really want is an elevated discussion between the patient and the physician. You really cannot just educate one party and not the other. And you want to also educate the payer. I mean, one of the things you want the payer to start to believe is that not all the medicines are the same, and not all of the underlying parts of dry eye are the same. So I think, you really have to meet your customers, your payers, your patients, your healthcare providers where they are. And sometimes that may mean DTC, and sometimes that may mean the internet, and sometimes that may mean your phone. So from our perspective, we're looking at a much more comprehensive omni-channel approach where, maybe 10 years ago, we would have done a lot of DTC. We're looking at DTC as being part of a much more sort of comprehensive outreach to a lot of our key customers, because at the end of the day, the patients are starting to play a much bigger role. And actually, if you start to go overseas, we really haven't talked about overseas. I think, outside of the US, we talk about 30 million patients in the US. The prevalence of dry eye outside the US is, upwards of 300 million and more. And I think there you're talking about potentially, pharmacists starting to play an important role as well. So you really have to know your customer and where can you meet them to make sure you can have that elevated conversation. So I think that's a real opportunity that companies are just starting to capitalize, and that will help everybody.
And Jehan, social media as well. I mean,
absolutely.
As much as some of us love or don't love social media, pick your side, right? It has a tremendous impact on everybody's life and is an amazing conduit for establishing that connectivity that leads to education and patient awareness.
Yeah.
So you can't
I think
underestimate the impact of it. Yeah.
I think
the ability of social media platforms to put people together and sort of with sort of common causes, so to speak, it really can work to your advantage if you are trying to educate, if you're trying to sort of offer an opportunity to educate. A lot of times, people absorb education different ways. And, you don't always take it from your physician. You may take it from your peers. You may take it from your family. I think all of those opportunities are there. And I think it's really, really important to be part of that dialogue. Otherwise, you have what was mentioned earlier, the disinformation, the, grandstanding takes place, and that does damage. And I think you really have to be honest and open and make sure that you can have that elevated conversation.
Well said. I'm just going to shift gears. These were great progress opportunities. I love the whole aspect of educating ECPs, direct consumer, even the social media aspects. So much opportunity now coming in. On the other side, what worries you? What are the challenges that could restrict the progress of treatments in the dry eye market? Is it payers? Is it education? Is the approval process? What worries you from the future growth? That trajectory should suddenly slow down.
It's payers. I think any new innovation is going to have to step through the older products, the generic ones. At least that's the assumption we're working under. So, like I mentioned earlier, it's a semi-mature market in that unless you can demonstrate a market difference with a new product, there's going to be a challenge getting it paid for, I think.
No, I agree 100%. I think that there's pros and cons to generic, the market leader going generic, for instance. Potentially it increases everything's going to be a step through. All the brands will be a step through generic. So that's the con. The pro is you potentially might get a bigger pool of patients adopting the product. So you've got a bigger pool to work with. And then the other thing to consider is that the churn rate of these patients on dry eye meds is quite high. So even if you get if everyone goes on generic, in a relatively quick period of time, you're going to get a lot of them that either can't tolerate it, they're not happy with the efficacy, they may get moderate benefit, but they want to try something else where they can get more benefit. So you're going to have a lot of different buckets of dissatisfied patients. And honestly, I think a step, from my perspective, is easier for a brand to deal with than PAs. So there's actually some positive aspects to a market leader going generic.
I think, with the payer aspects, you have definitely have that aspect. But I think, at Novartis as a global company, we are also faced with, reference pricing challenges overseas. I think, there are several geographies that over the years, pricing has eroded to the point where you couldn't even introduce a new product because what's available there is below your cost of goods. So, there's unfortunately, there's challenges, and I think a way to overcome those challenges is outcomes in education. I think that's why it's so important to make sure you take a comprehensive approach in how you invest to bring new medicines to those markets. But headwinds from payers, headwinds from education, all of those are barriers to an ever expanding market all over the world.
Yeah, I would agree with all those comments above. And I think what we talked about with regards to education, I think that's the two come together, really, right? Like if you're educating patients and doctors at that same time, parallel pathing the reason for this advancement of technology and getting those payers on board, knowing full well that their goal is to not bring in new technologies. So how do we turn that? It's just, again, because here's the one thing that I feel like in my experiences, if there's enough push up, right, the payers ultimately come to the table. So if you do enough of a groundswell and you have enough push up, then the payers will say, okay, this is something that we got because patients want it, doctors need it. So patients need it and doctors want it, so whatever you want to call it.
And I think we have to explore out-of-pocket options as well. And I think there are many parts of the world where out-of-pocket is the standard of care, so to speak, when it comes to it. So you have to be cognizant of that. And I think that goes a long way. And the other area that we're actually starting to get quite active in is looking at private insurance markets worldwide, which are also starting to develop and burgeon because of limitations of payers. So there's lots of opportunities to expand and explore there as well. But we can't forget there are 300 million dry eye patients that need our help, and it's really up to us to try and innovate to get them that help, along with our physician partners.
Really well said. It's a great panel of insights and in areas that we wouldn't even see as far as doctors and understand what goes on behind the scenes. Although prior auths, which I agree I don't care for very much, or our staff either, can be a real hindrance. And eventually we do kind of put up the white flag. So it was great discussion. This last question, probably a really important one. Then we'll let you have time, just your final comments. But you're all in positions where you are really kind of dictating the direction for your company in the space that we're talking about today. So when you're considering expanding your dry eye portfolio or diversifying offerings, what are some of the key factors you think of in deciding whether you acquire, do you collaborate, or partner with another company?
I think for us, first and foremost, it really comes down to the science and the novelty of the therapeutic or the modality or the approach. As we spoke to a few minutes ago, ideally we look for something that is a clear disease modifying therapeutic, not something that's just going to be, symptomatic in relief. Early we spoke to those small incremental advances really don't cut it either therapeutically or commercially, right? Either, with the patients or the payers. And I think that all falls ultimately on the robustness of the data package. And is there a clear and concise regulatory path, to approval? If there's a clear line of sight, then that's really great. And then I think lastly, just ensuring that how will our teams work together? Is the chemistry, the interpersonal chemistry between the teams, the companies, is it there to really make the collaboration work? And I think it's important that you think about that when it comes to, what each partner has, and that both the external partner and your company's needs are met. That's how I think about it.
I agree. I think you got to have a good strategic alignment, right? Like a relationship. To me, it makes me think of, Johnson & Johnson we have a credo, and we probably have all been exposed to that at some point, but it really starts with the patients and the doctors. So to me, if I'm working with a company or thinking about technology, the technology is going to be all something that is going to serve our patients in a need that they have, and make sure our doctors are well armed to not only treat those patients, but also make a fair, reasonable profit, right? Like that's important. But additionally, if I'm choosing a partner, I want somebody that's aligned to that. I want somebody that's going to also believe that, put the patient at the center, make it all about the patient, make sure that the doctor is taken care of. And if we think about that first, then, there's mutual benefit. So that's what we look at.
Yeah, I think we use a very simple litmus test after we do all of the due diligence. And really that is, does this allow the clinician to do something they currently can't? Something desirable and something they currently can't. And really, you can modify your approach once you've answered that question affirmatively. We bought a dry eye asset a year ago, and really that was the guiding light in terms of, it's a fluorinated alkane that potentially addresses meibomian gland dysfunction. It's something different. It could potentially allow a clinician to do something different. And that's sort of been our guiding light.
It's at Sun, we typically want to acquire. We're not, I think we found partnerships to be a little bit more complicated, a little bit more difficult to manage. So we'd like to buy assets, or for later stage or earlier stage companies will invest and get a option or right of first refusal on those assets. But we tend to shy away from partnerships.
I think at Novartis, we're sort of agnostic to where the science comes from, whether it's internal or partnership. We have actually both multiple partnerships as well as robust internal programs. I think there are the real four things that drive our decision making is innovative science. I think that's really important for us, because as a large multinational, you're constantly measured against your other colleagues in the company that have fairly robust portfolios, and if you cannot measure up on the science side, you will be left behind. And that's actually honestly to the benefit of the patient. You're not looking at incrementalism, that what you're producing is not just a sort of a quarter step forward. We look for clear differentiation versus competition. We are acutely aware of the challenges it brings from a payer and access side if you don't have that. We want to look at a compelling pricing and access story that comes from that differentiation. Is the story clear? Has the company thought about it and how they've designed their clinical trials? Are they looking for the right endpoints, the right measures early on in development? Is it even going to be possible maybe to retrofit if they haven't done it? And then, a good, solid development program to date if we're looking at a pre-launch asset. I've done this for many years, and I can't even count the number of companies where, the strategy is sound, but the development doesn't match it to date. They've taken shortcuts. They've done, poorly designed clinical trials. They haven't done the necessary commercial and access assessments they need to be done. And I think it's just too much of a lift to take on a project like that. Because at the end of the day, companies that typically haven't done that stuff also have an unrealistic expectation as to what their opportunity is worth. So, that sometimes just creates generally a bad feeling. And I think I would say from one of the comments made earlier, it really has to be a good fit between the partners for it to work. Otherwise, it just creates problems down the road, and it's not worth it.
Absolutely fantastic. You guys lived up to what we expected. Really an outstanding panel. Your insights all around were exceptional. It really helps the attendees of these meetings are also typically innovators. They are usually the leaders within ophthalmology and optometry or eye care as a whole within the industry that are part of startups and also those established. And I think this really shared a lot of your insights and so willingly too to help. And I think ultimately that's why this field of ophthalmology of eye care does so well, is because of that and that ability to kind of understand how we can make a bigger pie and also contribute and ultimately help our patients the most. So I want to thank all of you for your time, for your great insights, for answering some challenging questions, but doing it so well, so eloquently, and also such a way that's valuable for those in attendance. Hopefully we'll maybe see each other sometime in 2021, and I imagine what we're all looking forward to. And who knows? Forward. Yeah, so really with Absolutely. That, I just want to thank you, thank OIS, and I really appreciate your participation in this panel.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this discussion on dry eye disease. For those of you focused on the anterior segment, visit OIS.net to register for the upcoming Anterior Innovation Showcase taking place on April 8th. We hope you'll join us next week for more discussions with ophthalmology innovators.